about a mission that prevents world wars, I wouldn't have believed it. To me, it's unreal. And I think that the type of airmen we have are a little bit different than the rest of the airmen in the Air Force. I'm proud of all of them, but here it takes a special kind of selflessness. You know, when our airmen deploy over to Southwest Asia or other parts of the world, and they come home after 6 months or a year being shot at or being away from their families, people always applaud for them on airplanes. It means the world to them. And they know they've done something. When our airmen get back after 16 hours of being in the missile fields, in 20 degrees below zero weather, knowing that no matter how hard they work, no one will know what they did, unless they did it wrong. And they will get the baby the minute they walk through the door, even if it's at 2 a.m. to change the diaper. They'll also get to pay the bills the next day. They'll get to mow the yard. They'll get to shovel the snow. And there is no one lined up at the gates to applaud for them. That requires something different. And that's what makes me so doggone proud of them. And so when I say that I feel like I've won the lottery to tell this mission story to you and to others, every opportunity I get, it really does feel like I won the lottery. I mean it. And I get fairly graphic when I'm talking about this nuclear missile mission because it's a graphic mission, and I don't like to pussyfoot around with it. One, because I think the American public deserves to know what we really do. And I also want our enemies to hear it. That's the very essence of deterrence. If you think about deterrence, it occurs in the mind of all of our adversaries. And there are many adversaries out there, constantly sizing us up. And when you think about it, it really is a math problem. It's capability times will equals deterrence in the mind of each enemy. If you tinker too much with either the capability or the will, you change that calculation in ways you can't even understand until many times it's too late. And in a day of weapons of mass destruction, we can't afford to absorb a first strike like we did at Pearl Harbor. We won't have time to convert Ford F-150 tractor plants into B-24 plants. And so what we do is so vitally important that I want to be graphic with it, so I apologize for that. I am here on behalf of Colonel H.B. Brill, the wing commander. So you've drawn the B team this morning, and I apologize for that. Again, I'm Rob Stanley, the vice wing commander here at Malmstrom. Just very briefly, I actually, in 1986, went up to Grand Forks Air Force Base as a cadet in the Air Force ROTC program at Purdue University. I already knew I was going to be a missileer, and I listened to Colonel Bob Parker, the wing commander up there. And I was so impressed that when I went back to Purdue, I said, I'm going to Grand Forks. And I told my wife, my new wife, that we were going to go to Grand Forks, and she said, is that in Illinois? And I said, no, that's actually in North Dakota. And it was really nice, though. It was beautiful. Of course, I spent 2 weeks in June. And I said, the only thing up there are the mosquitoes. They're kind of rough, but we'll be fine. She said, oh, okay, whatever. And when you're from Indiana, any place is exciting. And so anyway, I put in through what they call Military Personnel Center, MPC, at Randolph Air Force Base at the time. And I graduated from college. My wife had already graduated, and I got a job in a factory to make ends meet while we waited to be brought on active duty. And one night I got a call from Captain Bill Bromley from MPC, and he said, Lieutenant, I see you want to go to Grand Forks. And I said, that's correct. And he said, well, would you rather go to Sicily? And I said, is that in Illinois? And he said, no, that's actually the real one in Italy. And I said, oh, okay, hold on a second, let me ask my wife. And I said, there's a fellow on here named Bill Bromley that says we could go to Sicily instead of Grand Forks, North Dakota. And she said, is that in Illinois? And I said, no, it's actually in Italy. And she said, well, tell him yes, you dumbass. And so I did. And we ended up at a ground-launched cruise missile assignment over in Sicily until Hussein invaded Kuwait. And our mission was drawn down. And then I got to be blessed with going to Strategic Air Command. And I did that at the 90th Strategic Missile Wing under Colonel Parkes, our first wing commander. I'm throwing some names out because I'm kind of hoping some of these people are here. I know General Parker's here. And then it was Colonel Tom Fagan. Then we got a newspaper headline at Warren that said, "The Lord is coming." And so General Lance Lord came in. And we just had, this one, and I'm not kidding, a great wing commander after great wing commander. What a great unit we were assigned to, and we enjoyed every minute of it. But then ACC came in and took us over, and then we went to Space Command, and all of us got farmed out, and I got to go back again and see us go from Space Command to Global Strike Command. And I can tell you, we're back. So with that, let's begin. Next slide. This is what we'll talk about. Next slide. So there's our mission. But when I talk to our airmen, and I do it a lot, I try to get out to our first-term Airmen Center especially. I talk to our Officer Professional Development Program, the youngest people I can get. The Right Start program, where people have just rolled off the turnip truck and they're over in the club trying to figure out which way to go to get to the commissary. And in FTAC in particular, I like to randomly select an airman, and I'll pick them, especially two-stripers, and say, "You, what's the mission of this wing?" They'll pop up, and stand there and look at me uncomfortably, and I've heard some things that would mortify you. One kid last week, when I said, "You, what's the mission of this wing?" said, "To protect the frontier." And the thing that frustrates me about that, actually kind of scares me, is these are going to be these kids, these adults who have raised their right hand and sworn to defend their country on their life, need to know that if they miss their little girl's birthday, to stand out and guard a launch facility where the remote sensors are down and it can't be secured properly unless they're out there, my God, they ought to know what they're doing is important. And they ought to know what sits underground. And they ought to know what that does in the mind of our adversary. Because it's got to be worthwhile or they won't do it right. And in those little two-man teams where they're watching each other, if you have one bad egg, we got problems. And just a monkey wrench that applies torque a little bit too much will result in 3-inch print in the Washington Post. In the political climate that we're in right now, we can't afford that, because there are those who truly don't understand the concept of deterrence. At least they forget human beings are in that mix, not antiseptic. So what I try to ingrain in our airmen is not that mission statement, because that's nice, that's hard to remember. The mission of the 341st Missile Wing, and I'm very proud of this, is to scare the hell out of America's most dangerous enemies. That is our mission. So they all memorize that. Next slide, please. Okay, very quickly on the triad. We've always thought of it in Cold War terms. And there are those, even very senior people, who recently have left the service, that think of the Cold War triad as a Cold War anachronism. Nothing could be further from the truth. If you look at the United States as an enemy, and you think that you have to account for this triad, it is insurmountable. Our ICBM force provides a very, very responsive capability to the President of the United States. If the President so orders, and we have to turn keys, an enemy needs to know that we can wipe their civilization off the face of the earth. Malmstrom alone, we have 150 Minuteman III intercontinental ballistic missiles capable of reaching just about anywhere we need them to reach, and they would impact their targets within half an hour of the time we turn keys in most cases. Each one of those missiles has at least one warhead on it that is 10 to 20 times more powerful than the Hiroshima bomb. You don't think that changed the calculus of the bad guys out there. Very responsive, and something that we always talked about in the past during the Cold War was this weapon system is vulnerable. Gosh, you can even go into Google and get the latitude, longitude, and elevation of each one of our launch facilities and see a picture of it. So the enemy knows where they are. Well, they're not as fragile as people thought. An enemy has to have so many weapons to take out this hardened weapon system. I've got maps that show you just how big this complex is, just at Malmstrom alone. But it's insurmountable. And I would say the ICBM force is quite cost-effective. You look at these other two legs of the triad, an incredibly powerful Ohio-class SSBN force gives us flexibility, survivability, an incredible punch that the enemy knows about, but it's an awful lot of eggs and very few baskets. And I often wonder about the communications. What might an enemy attack? Well, an enemy may not be as blunt as we think they might be. They might be someone smart enough to go after communication systems and that sort of thing. But that Ohio-class submarine force has to be accounted for, constantly and on patrol. And that our bomber force gives the President of the United States a very visible signal to all adversaries out there. Everyone sits up and takes notice. We fly B-52s to Guam. And when we launch a B-2 out of Whiteman, it makes the news all over the world just as well. But it's very slow. Not quite as responsive as we would like. Not in this day of lightning quick responses. And so, the bombers give us flexibility, they give us the ability to signal. The Ohio-class submarines give us a survivable force that can strike after we've taken a very powerful punch right in the kisser. That ICBM force does several things for us as well. It's extremely responsive, constantly on alert, just hovering under a 100% alert rate. And I will argue it's survivable, especially in this day and age. The other thing is it's cost effective. When you look at our economy, you can't ignore the benefits of being cost effective. Next slide, please. This is what the United States looks like to the Chinas, the Russias, the Irans, the North Koreas of the world. These are our nuclear forces. The submarines, by the way, that you see in the Atlantic and the Pacific, not exactly representative of how many submarines are actually on patrol. That number I cannot talk about, but I can tell you again, it's very few baskets with a whole lot of eggs in each one of them. You see the submarine ports at Bangor, Washington, Kings Bay, Georgia, very soft targets to an enemy. You see 3 bomber bases. They're at Barksdale Air Force Base. We have 1 B-52 wing. The B-2 wing at Whiteman Air Force Base just outside of Kansas City, another B-52 unit up at Minot Air Force Base. And then you see our 3 missile wings. Malmstrom Air Force Base, proud 341st Missile Wing. You see the 91st Missile Wing there at Minot, North Dakota, sharing that with the B-52 unit. And then you see the 90th Missile Wing at Warren Air Force Base, which, by the way, is where our headquarters, our numbered Air Force, 20th Air Force, is also headquartered. Can I get you to click on the missile field of Malmstrom? So an enemy looks at that, and he has to cover every single one of those targets. And he has to cover each one of those targets with more than one weapon to be sure that they've taken us out of the fight. Because how many nuclear weapons would you like to have land on your country? So they all have to be accounted for if you're an adversary. Could you take us back, please? By the way, our missile complex here at Malmstrom is 13,800 square miles. If I were to tilt it sideways, that's exactly the size of my home state of Indiana. That's a lot to account for. And then you've got the 91st and the 90th Missile Wing. That is insurmountable to an enemy that thinks about crossing a line. And I'm talking about a World War line. In August 1945, when we dropped the atomic bomb on Hiroshima and later on Nagasaki to get the Japanese to surrender, at that point, in just over 4 years of warfare, 2.5% of the world's population had been exterminated. 500,000 Americans were dead. 500,000. We estimate somewhere just under 30 million Soviets had died. Well, we may not be able to prevent Vietnams, we may not be able to prevent madmen like Saddam Hussein from walking into Kuwait, touching off a storm that lasts a decade or more. But we seem to be able to prevent world wars. The types of wars we fight now, because of the capability we give our nation, allow us to actually mourn, as we should, when we lose a Black Hawk with 13 brave souls on board in Afghanistan. That wouldn't have even caused somebody to blink during World War II. Next slide, please. So, if you have the Chinese, the Russians, the Iranians, the North Koreans, and you eliminate the ICBM force, this is what the United States looks like. Can I have you back up once, Brendan? This is a number I wanted to point out to you. That is approximately how many targets an enemy has to wipe out in order to make sure we no longer can respond to them with nuclear weapons. Next slide.